In the heart of South Carolina, a prison once known for its overwhelming control by guards and brutal punishments, came to be dominated by the inmates in one of the most remarkable and violent shifts in prison history. It was the late 1970s, and the institution in question was the infamous South Carolina State Penitentiary, also known as the Old Main. Built in the 19th century, this prison was originally designed to keep dangerous criminals under tight surveillance. However, by the time the 1970s rolled around, the power dynamics were shifting, and the structure was beginning to collapse. During this period, the prison's administration struggled to maintain control. Corruption, underfunding, and a rising level of gang activity were among the causes. The guards, too, were becoming increasingly ineffective, often outnumbered by the growing number of inmates who were becoming more organized and more aggressive. The state's overcrowded prison system became a ticking time bomb, and by the late 1970s, that bomb exploded. A critical turning point occurred in 1977, when a series of violent protests erupted inside the prison. These protests were not just a reaction to the overcrowded and inhumane conditions. They were a statement of defiance by the prisoners who felt that they had nothing to lose. They organized strikes, refused to work, and even staged hunger strikes. These were not the actions of disorganized individuals. They were the actions of a group determined to take control of their fate. In January 1978, the power struggle reached its apex when a group of inmates successfully took control of several cell blocks, and effectively the entire prison. They had become a well-organized force with leadership structures, codes of conduct, and even a system of justice that was run by the prisoners themselves. This was not just a rebellion, it was a revolution. The chaos that followed was unprecedented. Guards were taken hostage, and the prison's walls echoed with the sounds of a prison in full revolt. Inside, the inmates were not simply fighting for better living conditions, they were asserting their control over the entire institution. They quickly established their own hierarchy, appointing leaders from various gangs within the prison. These leaders governed with an iron fist, but in a strange turn of events, they also promised to bring a form of order to the chaos that had gripped the prison. The transformation from a brutal, corrupt facility to one run by inmates was a stunning turn of events. The old rules were no longer in play. Some prisoners, who had once been isolated and oppressed, were now given power and authority over others. But this new system did not come without its own forms of brutality. The prison was not a utopia. It was a harsh, lawless place, but it was a place where the inmates could take matters into their own hands. While the guards were now powerless, the state government was in a difficult position. To reclaim control of the prison would require a forceful intervention, but that could risk further violence and even loss of life. The situation quickly became a media spectacle, drawing attention from across the nation. The inmates had not just taken control of their physical environment, they had taken control of the narrative. They were no longer voiceless. For several months, the takeover persisted. Inmates operated their own court system, handed out punishments, and even organized trade systems within the prison. Some prisoners who had been on death row were freed from their cells, and those deemed innocent by the inmates were granted a level of protection from the more violent factions. While the leadership of the prison was fractured, there was a strange sense of unity among many of the inmates who were working together to survive. During the months that the inmates held control, the prison's food supply, medical care, and even basic security functions were managed by the inmates themselves. Some areas of the prison became surprisingly organized, while others descended into brutal violence. In the cell blocks that were run by the more powerful gangs, prisoners operated with near impunity. The prison's official leadership was in disarray, unable to retake control, and the inmates continued to govern with their own set of rules. As the prison was effectively under inmate control, outsiders began to intervene. Families of both the prisoners and the guards began to rally for action, but there was no easy solution. The state was reluctant to send in the National Guard for fear of escalating the violence. A tense standoff continued for months. Meanwhile, the media coverage surrounding the rebellion only fueled the inmates' resolve, giving them the feeling that they had the support of the public, or at least, the sympathy of those who had been ignored by the prison system for so long. The shift in power also meant a shift in how inmates viewed themselves. No longer just prisoners, they were now participants in a larger struggle, one that transcended the prison walls. They had become symbols of resistance, of the possibility of change. Some inmates, who had previously been seen as mere criminals, were now viewed as revolutionaries. They had taken control not just of a building, but of an entire system that had failed them. However, while some may have seen the takeover as a form of justice, it quickly became clear that this rebellion would not result in the kind of utopia that many had hoped for. The violence that ensued in the months following the takeover was overwhelming. Prisoners fought for control of valuable resources, such as food, weapons, and even power within the system itself. Those who opposed the leadership were often punished severely. In April 1978, after months of tense negotiations, the state finally decided to intervene. A large-scale operation was launched to retake control of the prison, and it was nothing short of a military-style operation. The National Guard, along with heavily armed police forces, entered the prison with overwhelming force. The prisoners who had held the prison for so long were swiftly subdued, and the rebellion was effectively crushed. However, the consequences of the takeover were far-reaching. The violence that erupted during the retaking of the prison led to a number of deaths and injuries on both sides. The state government faced widespread criticism for its handling of the situation, and many argued that the state should have intervened much earlier. The legacy of the prison takeover became a cautionary tale about the dangers of overcrowded and underfunded prison systems, and it sparked debates about prison reform that continue to this day. In the aftermath, the prison system was restructured, and the conditions within South Carolina State Penitentiary were scrutinized more closely. Some reforms were made, but many felt that the core issues had not been addressed. The incident also highlighted the growing power of inmate gangs and the increasing level of organization among prisoners in correctional facilities across the country. The prison rebellion at South Carolina State Penitentiary was not an isolated incident. It became a symbol of the deep dissatisfaction that many prisoners felt with the system that had incarcerated them. Over the years, other prisons across the country would see similar uprisings and instances of inmate-led resistance, though none would quite match the scale of what occurred in 1978. Even after the takeover ended, the stories of the rebellion lived on. Inmates who had been involved in the rebellion became legends in their own right, often remembered for their leadership and the way they had turned the tables on a system that had once oppressed them. Some were even released from prison in the years that followed, becoming activists or leaders within their communities. Their stories became a part of the prison narrative, an enduring testament to the power dynamics that exist behind the bars. The legacy of the rebellion also brought to light the need for more humane treatment of inmates. The conditions that had led to the uprising were far from unique to South Carolina. Across the United States, prisons were overcrowded, understaffed, and plagued by violence. The uprising highlighted the need for systemic change in how prisons operated and treated inmates. As the years passed, the South Carolina State Penitentiary became a symbol of both the failure of the prison system and the resilience of those who were subjected to it. It served as a stark reminder that when systems of power become too oppressive, even the most marginalized individuals can find ways to fight back. In popular culture, the prison rebellion was immortalized in books, documentaries, and movies. The event became a focal point for discussions about prison reform, and the story of how inmates had taken control of a major correctional facility became an enduring lesson in the complexities of power, resistance, and the need for justice. By the late 1980s, South Carolina State Penitentiary was officially closed, its legacy forever altered by the events of the 1978 rebellion. The facility, once the scene of unimaginable violence and control, was now a symbol of the profound struggles that occur when systems of authority are pushed to their limits. Today, the story of the prison where the inmates took over continues to resonate. It serves as a reminder that even within the darkest places, there can be moments of profound change, moments when the powerless find ways to fight for their dignity, their autonomy, and their survival. The event is an enduring part of the history of prison uprisings and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The events at South Carolina State Penitentiary also sparked a broader conversation about the future of the American prison system. The uprising demonstrated the severe consequences of overcrowded, inhumane conditions and the necessity for prison reform. While the prison rebellion was ultimately suppressed, its impact on public perception and policy could not be ignored. It became clear that real change was needed, not just in how prisons were managed, but in how society viewed its incarcerated populations. The rebellion at South Carolina State Penitentiary stands as both a historical turning point and a call to action, pushing for a more just and equitable approach to incarceration, managed by the inmates themselves. Some areas of the prison became surprisingly organized, while others descended into brutal violence. In the cell blocks that were run by the more powerful gangs, prisoners operated with near impunity. The prison's official leadership was in disarray, unable to retake control, and the inmates continued to govern with their own set of rules. As the prison was effectively under inmate control, outsiders began to intervene. Families of both the prisoners and the guards began to rally for action, but there was no easy solution. The state was reluctant to send in the National Guard for fear of escalating the violence. A tense standoff continued for months. Meanwhile, the media coverage surrounding the rebellion only fueled the inmates' resolve, giving them the feeling that they had the support of the public, or at least the sympathy of those who had been ignored by the prison system.